All right, guys, welcome back. This is our final section of Unusual Normality. You should have just watched the video to finish off his speech or his personal essay. Remember last time we left off with he was finishing talking about the paintball game that he played with his friends and how he beat them and everything and went home, told his mom. And then the one thing that was very reflective was that it was interesting for him to observe how his friends perceive what war is. So we're going to continue now with the next day at school, right? And in the text itself, we're going to talk about all the pieces that come together and hopefully come up with an overall idea or theme or something that's going on in the text. So, one of the first things that popped out to me is they never said that I had won all the games. I said nothing. They never invited me back. I didn't ask to be invited back. So these negative words, right? Never and nothing and never and didn't, right? They usually mean something, especially when they're grouped so close together. So of course I made a note because I annotate, right? Negative words are used to show the separation between Bea and his friends. And so basically, this is saying that he is showing that there is a separation between them, right? They aren't going to be mentioning how he won all the games, which separates him from everyone else. But of course, he doesn't want to make them look bad. So, of course, he's not going to invite himself and he's not going to say anything either. Okay, so these are some things that we want to think about. This definitely shows a separation with this negativity. But we're going to continue on and see if this is going to help us with some more understanding. So as we get to the next section, I see I so wanted to talk to them about the war. I wanted to explain certain things, but I was worried, right, that they would fear me. So these things that he wanted, right, that tells us that he is hoping for something a little bit different, right? But then, of course, I highlighted the word fear me as well, right? So wanted to include his friends in his past, but was afraid that they would see him differently, right? Remember that his past is that he was a child soldier and that he experienced things that his friends haven't, right? So now, more than ever, he wants to keep that childhood. And so even though he wanted to share his past, he couldn't. He was afraid to do it because he was afraid they would look at him differently. Right? When we think about these kinds of things, we see these words here along with these words here, right? This never, 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 I wanted, worried, fear, right? Like to me, this is basically him trying to be a part of the crowd, just like a typical teenager, right? He wants to be liked. He wants people to like him. He doesn't want to be treated differently. How many of you guys um, do the best that you can to make sure that no one really knows the really horrible things that happen in your life, except for those people that are really, really close to you? Think about that for a second. And usually it's because you want people to like you. You don't want people to look at you any differently or feel pity for you or anything like that. So he's feeling the same thing, right? He's still a teenager. He just had different childhood experiences than everyone else. So he kind of brings that back, right? With my silence allowed me to experience things, to participate in my childhood, to do things I hadn't been able to do as a child, right? And we're bringing back that childhood and that child again, right? He does mention those again and again and again and again, right? Throughout the entire essay. But I highlighted the word silence because when I see this word, initially I probably think, oh, he's not talking. But we know that he likes to talk to his friends, right? So in this case, there's a connotation for silence. So the connotation is that he's keeping quiet about his past, not necessarily just being quiet and not talking, right? It's about a specific thing. And so sometimes when we use words like that, we want to be aware that it can be referencing a specific thing versus what the general definition of that word means, right? That's what connotation is. And it gives a specific kind of feeling toward the statement or toward the text. Gives you a better understanding because we're looking at a connotation of that word. Okay, so then we keep going, right? He does tell them. He tells us that he does tell them eventually about his past and how he won the game, right? But in paragraph 94, I wish I'd been able to tell them early on because I wanted them to understand. how lucky they were to have a mother, a father, grandparents, siblings, right? And so basically, this section right here, right? I wish I had been able to, I wanted them to understand. Of course, I highlighted this because these are important. This is giving me that reflective tone, right? We talked about that earlier, how throughout this, he's constantly remembering back and like thinking about the decisions he made and then what he wanted to do versus what he actually did, right? So this is a reflective tone throughout this entire piece. And in this case, he's also trying to remind us, the reader, right, that his friends were lucky to have a family support system, right? The people who annoyed them by caring about them so much and calling them all the time and making sure they were okay, right? Like we get upset with our family and our family, but our support system, but they're there to help us, right? And so he's reminding the reader that we're lucky that we have support systems in our lives, right? Whereas maybe he didn't, because it was child soldier. He lost his parents early on. Who knows what happened to his grandparents, his siblings, right? It wasn't until he came to America where he can develop a different kind of family to have a support system. So as we keep going, if we look at the last paragraph, right, we've got that I wanted again. So we've got I wanted. We've seen it earlier up here, further up. I wanted, right? These words mean something because they're repeated so much, right? So the repetition of I wanted shows the importance of what he wished could have been different, right? And again, showing more of that reflective tone when we think about what he wanted or what he had wished for, he's thinking back, right? Reflection is this huge tone that's just kind of happening throughout this whole text, and it's all about the words that the author uses, the diction, right? One other piece that I want to point out is this coupled word, naive innocence, right? So we know what the word naive means, right? So naive basically means that you believe anything you're told. Like you don't know any better. You just do what you're told and you believe it and you're good to go, right? And then innocence is kind of the same thing. It basically means that you haven't really experienced anything negative, right? So to put these two words together when they basically mean the same thing, right? It emphasizes, right? I'm going to highlight because I did highlight this. So he uses both words together and he emphasizes how different his life is when compared to his friends, right? Because the both words mean basically the same thing. But because he's putting both words together, he's kind of showing that not only are they just believing what they're told, but they've really never experienced anything either, at least not as horrible as he had. So they have this naive innocence about them, right? And he uses it twice. And so that is something to think about as well, because, we talk about how when an author repeats something, it usually means something or it's important in some way. And so in this case, he's just kind of reestablishing what he means by being lucky and having that support system, or being lucky to just live in America and not have to have lived through a war like he did. One last thing I want to point out is this word right here, pretend, is italicized. So if you remember, there are not very many words in this text that are italicized, but this one is. So italicized, if you've never heard that before or remembered it, it basically means that it's the slanted words, right? And so italicized, the word pretend, basically is showing that, his teenage friends in America have not experienced an actual war. So it's pretend for them, and it's what they see in movies and what is represented for them. So, again, one more example of him emphasizing the fact that his friends in America have lived a different life than he has. And with that, we see that he's comparing both types of childhood, right? His childhood versus his friend's childhood. And this proves a point, and it emphasizes the different views in regards to war, right? And we know this because of the paintball story that he gave us, right, along with his own history in general. So overall, I would say if we think about the mood kind of changes throughout the text. We looked specifically at the paintball story and we said the mood was kind of exciting, right? Because we can feel with them, playing with them, and all of that stuff. But as we go through and we see even just this last section, it's no longer exciting per se. But overall, even with all the negative talk, I would definitely say the mood was optimistic, very positive, very reinforcing, kind of inspirational, right? He is looking at the positives more so than leaning on the negatives that have happened in his life. So the tone, though it's reflective, the mood is optimistic because it is more of a positive piece altogether rather than a negative piece just because he's thinking about his past. So I hope that helps in understanding how we look through a piece. I do hope that you enjoyed this text as much as I did, learning about his life in how he grew up in Sierra Leone, as well as how he grew up in America and the adjustments he had to make. I think it's very interesting to know, and it's a way for us to reflect upon our own lives as well. So now you're going to have a review to do to help you prepare for the common assessment. So please make sure to go through the Google form, reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you in class.